It was a wedding straight out of a fairy tale, set amidst the rolling hills of Napa Valley, with rows of lush vineyards glistening in the golden glow of a California sunset. 32-year-old tech millionaire Richard Grant and 25-year-old socialite Chloe Harris exchanged vows in a ceremony that would later be dubbed the event of the season by the press. Guests arrived in sleek luxury cars, dressed in designer gowns and tuxedos, sipping champagne as they admired the expansive vineyard estate that served as the backdrop for the couple's lavish celebration. Richard, a self-made entrepreneur who had transformed a small tech startup into a billion-dollar empire, was known for his charm, intelligence, and generosity toward those close to him. He embodied success, a man who seemingly had it all. Chloe, with her radiant smile and effortless elegance, was the perfect match for Richard's polished image. As the daughter of a prominent financier, she was a regular in high society circles, admired for her beauty and grace. To the outside world, Richard and Chloe appeared to be the ideal couple. Their whirlwind romance, splashed across tabloids and social media, seemed to confirm their love was just as real as it was glamorous. They met at a charity gala 6 months prior, where Richard was reportedly captivated by Chloe's intelligence and wit. The pair quickly became inseparable, with their relationship progressing at a rapid pace. Just 4 months after they began dating, Richard proposed during a romantic getaway in Santorini, presenting Chloe with a custom-designed diamond ring valued at over $1 million. The wedding itself was nothing short of spectacular, with over 300 guests, including celebrities, tech moguls, and prominent socialites, attending to witness the union of Richard and Chloe. A renowned chef prepared a 5-course meal, a Grammy-winning singer performed during the reception, and a fireworks display that capped off the evening was rumored to have cost upwards of $200,000. It was, by all accounts, a fairy tale, but beneath the sparkle and glamour, there were whispers, subtle hints that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. A bridesmaid recalled Chloe looking unusually tense during the ceremony, her smile not fully reaching her eyes. Richard's business partner mentioned a strange moment during the reception when Richard's tone became uncharacteristically sharp as he spoke to Chloe privately. To most, these fleeting moments were brushed off as typical wedding day nerves. After all, who could imagine that this dream wedding would quickly unravel into a nightmare? I'm glad you could join us. Before we dive deeper, please hit that like button to show your support. I'd also love to know where you're from. Let's get back to the story. The media portrayed the couple as a modern-day fairy tale, a brilliant tech visionary and a sophisticated socialite united by love and ambition. Richard was hailed as a romantic hero, a man who seemingly had everything but found his missing piece in Chloe. Meanwhile, Chloe's social media accounts were filled with images of their enviable lifestyle, private jet vacations, candlelit dinners, and designer gifts that seemed to float endlessly. However, those closest to Chloe knew there was more to the story. Chloe had always kept their relationship private, and her best friend, Maya Caldwell, recalled how Chloe made everything appear perfect on the outside. But when Maya asked how she was feeling, Chloe would change the subject. Looking back, Maya believed Chloe was trying to convince herself everything was fine. Richard, too, had his quirks that some found unsettling. While charming and generous, his charm often seemed calculated, as though he were always 2 steps ahead in every interaction. Former employees described him as a perfectionist, who demanded absolute loyalty and had little tolerance for mistakes. To his admirers, these traits were simply the hallmarks of a successful businessman, but to others, they hinted at something darker. The morning after the wedding, the fairy tale came crashing down. Guests still lingering at the vineyard estate were stunned to see Chloe leaving in tears, hastily packing her belongings into a waiting car. Her wedding dress, crumpled in the back seat, was a far cry from the pristine gown that had captivated the crowd just hours earlier. By afternoon, news broke that Chloe had filed for an annulment, citing irreconcilable differences. The announcement sent shockwaves through their social circles. How could a couple who had seemed so deeply in love fall apart less than 24 hours after saying, "I do"? Speculation ran rampant. Some suggested infidelity, others pointed to financial disagreements or even cold feet. But when Chloe's closest friends began hinting at a deeper, more sinister reason for her sudden departure, the story began to take on a darker tone. Reports surfaced that, on their wedding night, Richard had made a drunken confession that left Chloe shaken. The details were vague, but one name kept resurfacing: Emily Carter, Richard's former fiancée who had mysteriously vanished 5 years earlier. As journalists and investigators dug into Richard's past, they uncovered a trail of unanswered questions, conflicting accounts, and chilling coincidences. The lavish wedding, once the envy of millions, was now overshadowed by allegations of deception, manipulation, and even murder. As Chloe went into hiding, terrified of what Richard might do next, law enforcement began piecing together a story that would shake the foundations of Richard's carefully crafted empire. The stage was set for a dramatic investigation that would reveal the cracks in Richard Grant's seemingly perfect life and expose the chilling truth about what lay beneath his charm. What began as a love story for the ages was about to become one of the most captivating true crime cases of the decade. A tale of betrayal, secrets, and a dangerous obsession that refused to stay buried. The morning after what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, Chloe Harris was gone. Guests still lingering at the Vineyard estate were stunned to see Chloe storming out of the mansion, her face pale and eyes red from crying. Wearing a simple tracksuit and clutching an overnight bag, she hurriedly packed her belongings into the trunk of a waiting car. The bridal glow that had captivated the world hours earlier was replaced by an expression of shock and determination. She didn't look back as the car sped away, leaving her new husband, Richard Grant, behind. For many, her abrupt exit made no sense. The wedding had been nothing short of magical. Guests had sipped the finest wines, danced under sparkling chandeliers, and toasted to the seemingly perfect union of Richard and Chloe. What could have possibly gone wrong in less than 24 hours? The question lingered in the air, thick with speculation, as rumors spread among the remaining guests. By mid-afternoon, Chloe's departure had made headlines. TMZ broke the story first. New bride flees millionaire husband hours after saying, "I do." Within hours, mainstream media outlets picked up the story, sparking a frenzy of speculation. Was it cold feet? A pre-existing lover? A financial dispute? Everyone wanted to know why Chloe would leave the man she had so passionately declared her love for just the day before. The answer came when court documents surfaced, revealing that Chloe had filed for an annulment that same morning. The reason cited was simple, yet vague: irreconcilable differences. It was a legal term often used to cover up personal drama, but in this case, it only deepened the mystery. What kind of irreconcilable differences could have emerged so suddenly, just hours after the wedding? Adding to the confusion was Chloe's refusal to comment publicly. Paparazzi camped outside her family's estate, following her every move, but she remained tight-lipped. All anyone knew was that Chloe had left the Vineyard and was staying with a close friend in San Francisco, refusing to return to the mansion or even speak to Richard. Richard Grant, blindsided by the sudden annulment, went into immediate seclusion. Guests who had stayed at the estate for a post-wedding brunch were stunned when Richard failed to appear. Instead, a spokesperson addressed the gathering, stating that Richard appreciated everyone's support during this difficult time. The media speculated wildly about Richard's absence. Some claimed he had left the estate entirely, retreating to his second home in the Hamptons, while others suggested he was too embarrassed to face the public. However, those closest to him had a different story. One insider described Richard as distraught and furious. According to staff at the Vineyard, he spent the morning pacing the halls, demanding answers from anyone who had spoken to Chloe the night before. He couldn't understand what had happened, the source said. One moment they were husband and wife, the next, she was gone. It didn't make sense to him. Richard's business partner, Elliot Vance, later spoke to reporters, painting a picture of a man deeply in love and utterly confused. Richard was devastated, Vance said. He adored Chloe. To him, she was his everything. He didn't see this coming at all. As news of the annulment spread, so did the rumors. Social media buzzed with theories about what had gone wrong. Some speculated infidelity, though no evidence of an affair surfaced. Others suggested a disagreement over a prenuptial agreement might have caused the fallout. While Richard was a billionaire, and Chloe came from a wealthy family herself, leading some to wonder if financial concerns had been brewing beneath the surface. Many believed Chloe had simply gotten cold feet, overwhelmed by the enormity of marrying someone as high-profile as Richard. But those closest to Chloe began hinting that something darker was at play. Her best friend, Maya Caldwell, was the first to speak out, albeit cryptically. "There's more to this than people realize," Maya said in a now-deleted Instagram post. Chloe did what she had to do to protect herself. As speculation grew, journalists and vloggers began digging into Richard's past, hoping to uncover a clue about what could have gone wrong. Most of what they found painted Richard as the perfect catch, a self-made millionaire, a philanthropist, and a man who appeared deeply devoted to Chloe. His Instagram was filled with photos of the couple traveling the world, from a romantic gondola ride in Venice to a private yacht excursion in the Maldives. But a few unsettling stories began to emerge. Former employees described Richard as an intense, controlling perfectionist who demanded absolute loyalty from everyone in his orbit. He was the kind of guy who expected things to be done his way, no questions asked, said one former assistant. If you crossed him, you were out. These revelations, while not damning on their own, added fuel to the fire. Was Richard's controlling nature the reason Chloe fled? Or was there something even darker lurking beneath his polished exterior? Meanwhile, Chloe remained in hiding, staying with Maya at her San Francisco apartment. Reporters camped outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the runaway bride, but Chloe avoided public appearances. She turned off her social media accounts and refused to respond to calls or messages from Richard. Despite her silence, those close to her began leaking details about what had happened on the wedding night. One friend, speaking anonymously, claimed that Chloe had discovered something about Richard's past that terrified her. It wasn't just cold feet, the friend insisted. Chloe felt unsafe. That's why she left. These hints only added to the media frenzy. What could Richard have said or done to make Chloe, a confident and independent woman, feel so unsafe that she would walk away from a marriage less than a day after it began? As the days turned into weeks, the mystery of Chloe's sudden departure took on a life of its own. Rumors swirled about dark secrets, hidden motives, and possible danger. Richard, once seen as the perfect husband, was now under a cloud of suspicion, his every move scrutinized by the press. But the truth, when it finally emerged, would be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Chloe wasn't just running from a failed marriage, she was running for her life, and the story she would soon tell would expose a side of Richard Grant that no one had ever seen before. As the world scrambled to understand why Chloe Harris had walked away from her millionaire husband less than 24 hours after their wedding, the truth was slowly beginning to surface. Behind the glitz and glamour of their Napa Valley celebration lay a secret so disturbing that it would upend everything anyone thought they knew about Richard Grant. And that truth started with a confession, a moment of drunken vulnerability that left Chloe shaken to her core. The details of Richard and Chloe's wedding night had been a source of intense speculation in the days following her departure. According to Chloe's close confidant Maya Caldwell, the fairy tale facade began to crack as soon as the couple returned to Richard's sprawling Napa estate. The mansion in Napa Valley, illuminated by flickering lanterns and nestled among the vineyards, was supposed to be the ideal romantic setting. However, for Chloe, the atmosphere became increasingly stifling. Chloe told me that Richard was acting strangely, Maya shared in a private interview. He had been the perfect gentleman all day, but something changed as soon as they were alone. He became agitated and started drinking. Richard, known for his polished image, had always taken pride in his ability to control situations, but on his wedding night, he seemed to lose that composure. Chloe later described him as erratic, switching between moments of intense affection and cryptic comments that made her feel uneasy. He repeatedly said things like, "You don't really know me yet," and "You'd be surprised at what I've been through." At first, Chloe thought he was just drunk and rambling, but as the evening went on, his remarks became more unsettling. While sitting on the balcony, overlooking the vineyard, Richard began talking about his past relationships. Chloe listened politely at first, but her discomfort grew when Richard mentioned Emily Carter, his former fiancée. According to Chloe, Richard explained that his engagement to Emily ended under complicated circumstances, claiming Emily had left without warning. However, his tone when talking about her was disturbing. He said something like, "Emily thought she could just walk away, but no one walks away from me." Chloe later told Maya, "It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. He seemed proud of it." When Chloe pressed him for more details, Richard became defensive, accusing her of not trusting him and suggesting that she didn't understand the depth of the pain he had experienced due to Emily's departure. Then, in a moment Chloe would later describe as the turning point, Richard muttered something under his breath that made her blood run cold. "It doesn't matter anymore. She's gone and no one's going to find her." Chloe was stunned. The implications of his words were impossible to ignore. Had he just confessed to harming his former fiancée? Or was he merely rambling as a drunk man caught up in emotions? Chloe's mind raced, trying to process what she had just heard. She asked Richard to clarify, but he brushed her off, claiming she was overthinking it and telling her to forget about it. Maya said. But how could she? The way he said it, it didn't sound like a drunk slip-up. It felt like the truth. Chloe's instincts told her she was not safe. She excused herself, claiming she needed to use the bathroom, and locked herself in the guest bedroom instead of returning to the master suite. For hours, she lay awake, replaying Richard's words and trying to make sense of the kind of man she had just married. By morning, Chloe had made up her mind. She couldn't stay, especially with the doubts and fears swirling in her head. As soon as she was sure Richard was asleep, she packed a small bag, grabbed her phone, and slipped out of the mansion. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she had to leave. She didn't even tell her mom where she was at first. She just called me and said, "I need a place to stay, I'll explain later," Maya said. She was terrified. Chloe arrived at Maya's San Francisco apartment later that morning, visibly shaken but determined to take action. Within hours, she had filed for an annulment, citing irreconcilable differences as the official reason. Privately, she began sharing what Richard had said to her on their wedding night, a revelation that would soon lead to a full-scale investigation into Richard's past. Emily Carter's name, which had largely been forgotten by the public, was suddenly brought back into the spotlight. 5 years earlier, Emily had been a rising star in the fashion world, known for her striking beauty and ambition. Her engagement to Richard had been the talk of high society, but their relationship ended abruptly, with Richard claiming that Emily had left him for another man. However, Emily's family had never believed Richard's version of events. They described her as deeply in love with Richard and committed to their future together. Her sudden disappearance had seemed completely out of character. Although police had initially investigated the case, no evidence of foul play was found, and Emily's case eventually went cold, leaving her family with unanswered questions and a sense of dread. When Chloe mentioned Emily's name to the authorities, it sparked immediate interest. Detectives began revisiting the cold case, combing through old reports and re-interviewing Emily's friends and family. What they uncovered would cast a shadow over Richard's previously pristine image and set the stage for one of the most shocking true crime revelations of the decade. When news broke that Chloe had mentioned concerns about Emily Carter in her annulment filing, Richard was furious. In a carefully worded statement released through his publicist, he dismissed Chloe's claims as misguided and emotionally driven. Richard is deeply disappointed by Chloe's decision to end their marriage so suddenly. The statement read, "The allegations about his past are entirely baseless, and he looks forward to clearing his name." However, behind closed doors, Richard's behavior reportedly became erratic. Staff at his Napa Valley estate described him as paranoid, refusing to leave the property and instructing his legal team to take aggressive action against Chloe for defamation. Richard didn't just want to clear his name, one insider said. He wanted to destroy Chloe for daring to speak out. As the investigation into Emily's disappearance intensified, the cracks in Richard's carefully constructed persona began to show. Detectives uncovered troubling details about his past, including accounts of controlling behavior and a history of volatile relationships. Meanwhile, Chloe, now in hiding, began receiving anonymous threats, warning her to remain silent. The fairy tale wedding that had captivated the world was now a full-blown scandal. Richard Grant, once hailed as a tech visionary and devoted husband, was now at the center of a criminal investigation that would uncover secrets far darker than anyone had ever imagined. For Chloe, the decision to walk away wasn't just about escaping a bad marriage, it was about survival. Emily Carter had once been the darling of the fashion world, a young woman whose striking beauty and ambition seemed destined for greatness. Born and raised in Chicago, she had moved to Los Angeles in her early 20s to pursue a career in modeling, quickly gaining recognition in high-profile campaigns and magazine spreads. It was during a charity event in Beverly Hills that she first crossed paths with Richard Grant. The two were introduced by mutual friends, and their chemistry was instant. From the start, Richard showered Emily with attention and gifts, lavish vacations, diamond jewelry, and private jets. No expense was spared in creating the appearance of the perfect couple. Richard, the charismatic tech mogul, and Emily, the stunning model, seemed to have it all. Their engagement was announced with great fanfare, and their names became synonymous with glamour and success. However, beneath the surface, cracks began to appear in their relationship. Emily's friends noticed she became more withdrawn over time, often making excuses to avoid social outings. Her once effervescent personality seemed subdued, as though something or someone was weighing heavily on her. "She stopped being herself," said Laura Jenkins, one of Emily's closest friends. "At first, I thought it was the pressure of planning a high-profile wedding. But then she started telling me things, small things, that made me worry." According to Laura, Emily confided that Richard was becoming increasingly controlling. He would question her whereabouts, monitor her phone calls, and discourage her from spending time with certain friends. At first, Emily dismissed his behavior as protective, but over time, it became clear that Richard's actions were more about control than care. In the months leading up to their wedding, Emily shocked everyone by abruptly calling off the engagement. Richard's public statement at the time was measured and sympathetic, claiming the split was mutual and that Emily had chosen to focus on her career. However, Emily's family and friends knew better. "Emily told me she couldn't marry him," Laura recalled. "She said she felt like she was suffocating, like she wasn't safe." Shortly after the breakup, Emily disappeared. Her family reported her missing, but the investigation yielded little. Richard claimed she had left town, possibly with another man, and authorities found no evidence to contradict his story. With no body and no solid leads, the case went cold. Emily's family, however, never believed Richard's version. They described Emily as someone who would never leave without telling them, especially not without contacting her younger sister, Leah Carter, whom she adored. For years, Leah kept a box of Emily's favorite things, hoping that one day her sister would return to claim them. "I always knew something happened to her," Leah said tearfully in a recent interview. "I just didn't have the proof." When Chloe Harris went public with her account of Richard's drunken confession on their wedding night, Emily's name resurfaced in the headlines. The allegations gave investigators a reason to reopen the case, and for the first time in years, Emily's family felt a glimmer of hope that the truth might finally come to light. Detectives began piecing together a timeline of Emily's final days, re-examining old evidence, and interviewing people who had been close to her. One discovery stood out: a journal entry written by Emily just weeks before her disappearance. In it, she expressed fear and uncertainty about her future with Richard, describing him as obsessive and unpredictable. "Every time I try to leave, he pulls me back in," Emily wrote. "He says he can't live without me, but sometimes I wonder if I'll be the one who can't live." As detectives revisited Richard's involvement in Emily's disappearance, his story began to crumble. In his initial interviews, he had maintained that Emily left of her own free will. However, emails recovered from his personal accounts revealed a different picture. In one email sent to a private investigator just weeks after Emily's disappearance, Richard asked for updates on her whereabouts. Despite publicly claiming he didn't know where she had gone, he wrote, "I need to know if she's talking to anyone. Find her and let me know if there's a problem." The contradictions in Richard's statements raised red flags for investigators, who now suspected that Emily's disappearance was far more sinister than originally believed. The stage was set for a deeper investigation, one that would soon uncover chilling evidence hidden in plain sight. A search of Richard Grant's Napa Valley estate began as part of the reopened investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance. What investigators found there would implicate Richard in ways no one could have predicted. It wasn't just Emily's case that would be brought to light, but the dark truth about Richard. The first breakthrough came when detectives discovered a hidden compartment in Richard's private office, concealed behind a false panel in the wall. Inside, they found a collection of items that immediately raised suspicion. Among them were a stack of love letters written by Emily, some of which had been torn and taped back together, a locket containing a photo of Emily as a child, and a diamond engagement ring, which Emily's family confirmed was the one she had returned to Richard when she called off the wedding. But the most disturbing find was a journal, Richard's journal. In it, he had documented his thoughts and frustrations during his relationship with Emily. One entry, dated just weeks before her disappearance, read, "If she doesn't come back, I'll make sure no one else gets her either. She belongs to me, whether she realizes it or not." The discovery of this journal sent shockwaves through the investigative team. It wasn't just evidence of Richard's possessiveness. It was a chilling hint at what he might have done to ensure Emily never left him. As detectives delved deeper into Richard's life, former employees and acquaintances began coming forward with their own accounts of his behavior. One former assistant described Richard as paranoid and volatile, often lashing out at staff for minor mistakes. Another former housekeeper recounted an unsettling incident in which Richard insisted on scrubbing the floors of the guest house himself, forbidding anyone else from entering for days afterward. However, it was the testimony of Jake Landry, a former security guard at the estate, that proved most damning. Jake recalled seeing Richard bury something near the fire pit in the back garden one night, just weeks after Emily's disappearance. When Jake asked Richard about it, he was told to mind his own business. "I didn't think much of it at the time," Jake admitted. "But now, looking back, I think I knew. I just didn't want to believe it." Armed with a warrant, police excavated the fire pit Jake had mentioned. What they found would shake the case and Richard's world to its core. Buried beneath layers of ash and soil were human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed what Emily's family had feared for years. The remains belonged to Emily Carter. The discovery of Emily's body was a turning point in the investigation. It provided the concrete evidence detectives needed to charge Richard with murder, ending years of uncertainty for Emily's family. But it also raised new questions. How had Richard managed to hide the truth for so long? And were there other secrets he was still keeping? The answers to these questions would soon emerge, casting a spotlight on the darker corners of Richard Grant's life and leaving the world to wonder how many more secrets were buried beneath his carefully constructed image. After fleeing her new husband and exposing his chilling confession, Chloe Harris hoped to leave the nightmare behind. But as the media frenzy surrounding her annulment grew and law enforcement intensified their investigation into Richard Grant, Chloe found herself trapped in a web of fear and paranoia. She knew she had exposed a dangerous man, and now she was his target. Chloe had barely settled into the relative safety of her best friend Maya's apartment in San Francisco when the first threat arrived. It came in the form of a text message from an unknown number. "You don't know what you're talking about. Stay quiet if you know what's good for you." At first, Chloe brushed it off as an empty threat, likely from one of Richard's die-hard supporters. But the messages didn't stop. Over the next few days, they escalated, becoming more specific and terrifying. "We know where you are. You're ruining his life. Be careful." The messages left Chloe shaken, but what truly terrified her was the realization that someone had been watching her. One message included a photo of her walking into Maya's apartment building, taken from a distance. Another included a cryptic warning. "San Francisco isn't far enough to run." Fearing for her safety, Chloe hired a private investigator, Grant Holloway, a former cybercrimes detective known for his meticulous work. Holloway immediately began sweeping Chloe's devices for signs of tampering, and what he found confirmed Chloe's worst fears. Richard had installed spyware on her phone and laptop months before their wedding. The software allowed him to monitor her emails, text messages, location, and even access her camera. It was a chilling revelation that left Chloe feeling violated and vulnerable. Holloway later told reporters, he was tracking her every move. This wasn't just about control, it was about power. He wanted to own every part of her life. Worse still, Holloway uncovered evidence that Richard had hired a private investigator to follow Chloe in the weeks leading up to their wedding. Chloe had thought Richard's attentiveness was part of his charm, but now she realized it was something far more sinister. Terrified but determined, Chloe decided to go public with her story in an emotional interview with Maria Delgado, a journalist known for her compassionate coverage of abuse survivors. Chloe recounted her wedding night, Richard's confession, and the threats she had been receiving. "I loved him," Chloe said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought he was everything I ever wanted. But the man I married wasn't the man I thought he was. He's dangerous, and I need people to understand that." The interview aired on national television and quickly went viral. Viewers were captivated by Chloe's raw vulnerability and courage. Her revelations added even more pressure on law enforcement to uncover the truth about Richard's past, while also casting a glaring spotlight on the dark underbelly of his seemingly perfect life. In the wake of Chloe's interview, public opinion began to shift dramatically. Once hailed as a charismatic visionary, Richard was now painted as a controlling, manipulative man with a dangerous temper. Former employees and acquaintances came forward with their own stories, describing Richard as a perfectionist who demanded absolute obedience and lashed out at anyone who challenged him. One former employee recalled an incident in which Richard smashed a laptop in a fit of rage after discovering a minor error in a presentation. It was like a switch flipped, the employee said. One minute he was calm, the next he was terrifying. The growing chorus of accusations made it impossible for Richard to maintain his public image. Even his staunchest supporters began to distance themselves, leaving him increasingly isolated as the investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance intensified. As Chloe's revelations brought renewed attention to Emily Carter's disappearance, the investigation into Richard Grant gained momentum. Law enforcement ramped up their efforts to uncover the truth, and what they discovered left no doubt about Richard's guilt and revealed the extent of his deception. Armed with a search warrant, detectives returned to Richard's sprawling Napa Valley estate, this time accompanied by a forensic team. They meticulously combed through the property, from the main house to the guest house, searching for anything that could connect Richard to Emily's disappearance. The breakthrough came when they focused on a remote area of the estate, a fire pit nestled in a wooded corner. It was a spot Richard rarely allowed anyone to visit, insisting it was his private retreat. The pit had long been abandoned, overgrown with weeds and covered in layers of ash and debris. But when investigators began excavating, they uncovered something chilling: human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed what Emily's family had feared for years. The remains belonged to Emily. She'd been buried beneath the fire pit, her body partially burned in what seemed to be an attempt to destroy evidence. As detectives continued their investigation, they uncovered a treasure trove of incriminating evidence on Richard's personal devices. Emails sent to a private investigator shortly after Emily's disappearance painted a picture of a man desperate to control the narrative. In one email, Richard asked the investigator to track Emily's movements and report back on anyone she was meeting. "I need to know who she's talking to," Richard wrote. "Make sure she's not planning something." These emails directly contradicted Richard's public statements that Emily had left him willingly. Instead, they suggested he had been obsessed with her even after their relationship ended, and was willing to go to extreme lengths to keep tabs on her. With the discovery of Emily's remains and the incriminating emails, investigators began piecing together the final days of her life. They believed that after Emily called off the engagement, Richard lured her back to his estate under the pretense of reconciliation. When she refused to reconsider, he killed her in a fit of rage and attempted to cover up the crime by burying her body beneath the fire pit. "It was calculated," said lead investigator Detective Olivia Marks during a press conference. "He thought he could erase her, make her disappear, and move on like nothing happened. But Emily fought back. She left behind clues, and now she's finally getting the justice she deserves." The discovery of Emily's remains was the final nail in the coffin for Richard Grant. Police arrested him at his estate in the early hours of the morning as he prepared to leave for his private plane. He was charged with first-degree murder and obstruction of justice, his carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, neighbors gathered outside the estate, some watching in silence, others shouting their disgust. The man who had once been the pride of Napa Valley was now its greatest disgrace. With Richard in custody, detectives continued to uncover more evidence linking him to Emily's death. Forensic experts analyzed the remains found in the fire pit, discovering traces of accelerants that suggested Richard had tried to burn Emily's body. DNA evidence found on items in the hidden compartment in his office further tied him to the crime. Meanwhile, Chloe, still in hiding, expressed relief at Richard's arrest, but remained cautious. "He's where he belongs," she said in a brief statement, "but I'll never stop looking over my shoulder." For Emily's family, the discovery of her remains brought a bittersweet sense of closure. After years of unanswered questions, they finally had proof of what happened to their daughter. However, the pain of losing her and the horrifying details of her death would never fully fade. As the case moved toward trial, the world braced for what would be one of the most shocking legal battles in recent history. Richard Grant, the man who once seemed untouchable, was now facing the full weight of justice, and the secrets he had tried so hard to bury were finally coming to light. The trial of Richard Grant quickly became a media spectacle, with every detail of his life and his crimes scrutinized by the press and public alike. For weeks, the courtroom in San Francisco's Superior Court was packed with reporters, true crime enthusiasts, and members of Emily Carter's family, all eager to witness the downfall of the man once celebrated as a tech visionary and philanthropist. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of Richard as a controlling, manipulative man, whose desire for power and dominance extended beyond the business world into his personal relationships. Meanwhile, The defense sought to portray Richard as a victim of circumstantial evidence and media bias, claiming that the discovery of Emily's remains was nothing more than a tragic coincidence. Mr. Grant has been a target his entire career, defense attorney Jack Mallory told the jury. His success, his wealth, and his prominence make him an easy scapegoat. The prosecution's case was built on overwhelming evidence. Forensic analysts testified about the human remains found beneath the fire pit on Richard's estate, identifying them as belonging to Emily Carter through DNA analysis. Bone fragments showed signs of burn damage, consistent with an attempt to conceal the crime. Investigators also described the hidden compartment in Richard's office and the disturbing items found within, including Emily's engagement ring and Richard's personal journal. In one of the journal entries presented in court, Richard wrote, "If she leaves, there will be consequences she can't escape." Prosecutors argued that these entries were clear evidence of premeditation. Chloe's testimony became one of the most anticipated moments of the trial. Calm but visibly emotional, she recounted Richard's drunken confession on their wedding night. "He said Emily was gone and that no one would ever find her," Chloe told the jury. "The way he said it, it was terrifying." District Attorney Rachel Mendez's closing argument was a scathing indictment of Richard's character. "Richard Grant was not just a man who couldn't handle rejection," she said. "He was a man who believed he was entitled to absolute control over his business, his image, and the women in his life. When Emily Carter defied him, he didn't let her go. He silenced her." Richard's defense team, led by Jack Mallory, argued that the case was based on circumstantial evidence. They claimed that the remains found on the estate could have been planted by someone seeking to frame Richard, emphasizing his high-profile status as a motive for jealousy or revenge. The evidence presented by the prosecution, while compelling on the surface, fails to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Richard Grant is responsible for Emily Carter's death, Mallory said. The defense also sought to discredit Chloe's testimony, accusing her of exaggerating Richard's comments to justify her decision to leave the marriage. Mallory described Chloe as an opportunist looking to escape the media scrutiny that came with marrying a public figure. After weeks of testimony and arguments, the jury deliberated for just 2 days before reaching a verdict. On a crisp autumn morning, the courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood to read the decision. Guilty of first-degree murder. Richard Grant was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The announcement was met with quiet tears and sighs of relief from Emily's family. Chloe, seated in the gallery, closed her eyes and exhaled deeply. For her, the verdict was not just a confirmation of Richard's guilt, it was a validation of her courage in coming forward. As Richard was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he maintained his composure, but his once charismatic charm was gone. For the first time, he looked small, like a man stripped of the power and control he had fought so desperately to hold on to. In the wake of Richard Grant's conviction, the story of Emily Carter and the bravery of Chloe Harris became a symbol of resilience and justice. But even as the trial concluded, the ripple effects of Richard's actions continued to reverberate, leaving lasting scars on everyone involved. For Emily's family, the verdict brought a measure of peace. After years of unanswered questions, they finally had justice. Her younger sister, Leah Carter, who had tirelessly advocated for reopening the case, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. "We finally have justice for Emily," Leah said, her voice breaking. "It doesn't bring her back, but it means the world to know that Richard will never hurt anyone else. She deserved so much better than what happened to her." The family announced plans to establish the Emily Carter Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting victims of domestic abuse and advocating for cold cases to be revisited. The foundation quickly gained support from communities across the country, becoming a beacon of hope for families still searching for answers. Chloe Harris, who had gone into hiding during much of the investigation and trial, emerged as a vocal advocate for survivors of abuse and manipulation. In her first public interview after the trial, she reflected on the whirlwind of events that had changed her life forever. "Richard hid who he was so well," Chloe said, "but I want people to know that it's okay to speak up, even when it feels impossible. If I hadn't walked away when I did, I don't know what would have happened to me." Chloe began working with the Emily Carter Foundation, sharing her story at events and helping to raise awareness about the warning signs of abusive behavior. Her courage inspired countless others to step forward, creating a ripple effect of empowerment and support. As the dust began to settle, an anonymous letter arrived at Chloe's new residence. The envelope, marked with no return address, contained a single typewritten page with a chilling message. Richard wasn't just responsible for Emily. There are others. Look into the name Cassandra Wells. The cryptic letter reignited speculation about the full extent of Richard's crimes. Investigators began re-examining unsolved cases involving women who had gone missing in cities where Richard had lived or visited. While no concrete connections were immediately found, the possibility of accomplices or additional victims cast a dark shadow over Richard's already tarnished legacy. The trial also sparked a national conversation about the dangers of power imbalances in relationships and the importance of recognizing red flags. Legal experts praised the detectives and prosecutors who had worked tirelessly to bring Richard to justice, while psychologists emphasized the subtle forms of control and manipulation that often precede more overt violence. Richard Grant's case isn't just about one man's crimes, said Dr. Janice Holloway, a clinical psychologist. It's a stark reminder of how control, entitlement, and unchecked power can spiral into devastating consequences. For Napa Valley, the once idyllic estate where Richard and Chloe's wedding had taken place became a symbol of the thin line between appearance and reality. The vineyard, now shuttered and abandoned, stood as a haunting reminder of the secrets buried beneath its surface. Chloe, now rebuilding her life far from the public eye, hoped that her story would serve as a warning and a source of strength for others. "If I learned one thing," she said in her final interview, "it's that the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it." The story of Richard Grant, Emily Carter, and Chloe Harris became more than just a sensational headline. It evolved into a tale of courage, justice, and the enduring power of truth. As investigators continued to follow the threads left behind by Richard's actions, one question lingered. How many more secrets would the man who once had it all take to his grave? The conviction of Richard Grant brought some closure to Emily Carter's family and Chloe Harris's supporters. But the story of Richard's crimes was far from over. Just as the public began to digest the shocking details of the trial, an anonymous letter sent to Chloe's new residence opened the door to a chilling new chapter. The envelope arrived without fanfare. No return address, no identifiable markings, and no clue as to who had sent it. Inside was a single typewritten page, its message brief but disturbing. Richard wasn't just responsible for Emily. There are others. Look into the name Cassandra Wells. Chloe's hands trembled as she read the letter, the cryptic nature of its contents filling her with a renewed sense of dread. Who was Cassandra Wells? And how was she connected to Richard? Chloe forwarded the letter to the lead detective on Emily's case, Detective Sarah Coleman, who immediately recognized the gravity of the potential revelation. "I've seen cases like this before," Coleman later said. "When someone as calculated as Richard is caught, there's often more to the story than what's immediately visible. This letter was a breadcrumb, and it was up to us to follow the trail." Detective Coleman and her team began investigating the name Cassandra Wells, starting with missing persons databases and cold case files. What they discovered sent a chill through the department. Cassandra Wells, a 29-year-old artist from Seattle, had disappeared under suspicious circumstances nearly 7 years earlier. Her last known location was a tech conference in San Francisco, where Richard Grant had been a keynote speaker. Cassandra's disappearance bore eerie similarities to Emily Carter's case. She had been in a relationship with a wealthy man at the time, though her family had never been able to identify him. Friends described Cassandra's partner as intensely private and controlling, but no concrete leads had ever emerged. Her case, like Emily's, had gone cold. As detectives delved further, they discovered a pattern. Over the past decade, 2 other women, Sophie Park and Lila Brennan, had vanished in cities where Richard had either lived or traveled for business. Like Cassandra, both women had been in relationships with mysterious, high-profile men, and both cases had stalled for lack of evidence. The letter also hinted at the possibility that Richard hadn't acted alone. Investigators began re-examining his inner circle, looking for anyone who might have been complicit in his crimes. One name stood out: Elliot Vance, Richard's longtime business partner and confidant. Elliot had been conspicuously absent from the trial, refusing to testify despite being subpoenaed. Emails between Richard and Elliot, recovered during the initial investigation, took on new significance. In one exchange, Richard wrote cryptically, "We've cleaned up before, and we can do it again. Don't let this get out of hand." At the time, the email had been dismissed as a discussion about business matters, But in light of the letter, it now seemed far more sinister. Detectives questioned Elliot, but he denied any involvement, claiming he had no knowledge of Richard's alleged crimes. Without concrete evidence, the investigation into Elliot's potential role stalled, leaving a cloud of suspicion that would linger for years. The letter and subsequent revelations reignited public interest in the case, with true crime enthusiasts and investigative journalists diving into the possibility that Richard's crimes extended far beyond Emily Carter. Podcasts and documentaries speculated about the fates of Cassandra, Sophie, and Lila, drawing chilling parallels between their disappearances and the known details of Emily's murder. For Chloe, the letter was a grim reminder that her nightmare was far from over. Though she had taken steps to rebuild her life, the possibility that Richard had other victims, and potentially accomplices, made her feel as though she would never truly be free. "I thought the trial would bring an end to all of this," Chloe said in a rare interview. "But now I realize that Richard's shadow stretches much further than I ever imagined." In response to the letter and new leads, detectives formally reopened their investigation into Richard's connections to other unsolved disappearances. They issued public appeals for information, urging anyone who had been in contact with Richard or his associates to come forward. Though the investigation remains ongoing, it has already unearthed chilling details suggesting that Richard's crimes were part of a much larger, more complex web of manipulation and violence. The final chapter of Richard Grant's story remains unwritten, but one thing is clear. The truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light. Thank you for joining us today. Make sure to like and subscribe to help our channel grow. We'd love to read your comments about the case we just explored, and don't forget to check out more intriguing cases on our channel.